let's look at identifying polynomial coefficients. So it asks us to identify the coefficients of this particular polynomial. Okay. Now when I see this polynomial right away, I notice one thing. Okay, and that's that it's not in standard form. Notice how on this polynomial it goes from degree of 2 to degree of 3, and then to no exponent at all. It's just sort of confusing. Okay, so the way that we actually want to write this is we want to write this in standard form. Okay, and so we're going to actually start with the highest degree. So I'm going to start with this positive x to the third. Okay, so the first thing I'm actually going to write out is, actually let's do this. I'm just going to say write in standard form. Okay, so standard form, our polynomial is going to look like this. Okay, now there's a couple really important things to understand here. Okay, you're first going to write x to the third. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to look for is my x squared term. Okay, now notice I have a negative 4x squared. So I'll write that down next. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to write here, I'm looking for my x term. Okay, now notice we don't see an x term in our original problem. And so the way that we're actually going to write this is we're going to write plus 0x, just like this. Okay, and now finally after the x term comes the constant term. Okay, so the very last thing we have here is this positive 3. Okay, so I'm going to write this positive 3 on the end. Okay, now the coefficients are just going to be that number that's being multiplied by x to whatever degree it is. So remember, when there's nothing out here, that means it's going to be a 1. So it's 1x to the third. So our coefficients are, I'm going to say our coefficients are, well, we have 1x to the third. Okay. The next thing we have is the negative 4x squared. So actually negative 4 is our coefficient here. So we're going to go ahead and write the negative 4 as our next coefficient. Okay. The next one we actually have is 0. So 0 is our next coefficient. And then finally the last one we have is just this constant term. Okay, so this constant term is just this 3. And we will also include the constant there as well. Okay, so these are the coefficients of our polynomial that is actually in standard form. Okay, so pretty simple. We're going to go ahead and just take a look at another example in this particular video. Okay, so we're going to turn the page here. Let's look at one more example. Okay, identify the coefficients of 4 minus x plus 2x to the third. Okay, so same thing. We want to write it in standard form first. So I'm going to go ahead and write standard form. Okay, and I'm going to identify what I want to write down first. So my term with my largest degree here is the positive 2x to the third. So I'm going to write down 2x to the third first. My next largest term should be x squared, but I actually don't have one here. So I'm going to write plus 0x squared. Okay, it's important that we fill in the missing degrees. Okay, now again, let's look at our x term. Okay, so now we're looking at x to the first, or our x term. So I have a negative x. Notice how I'm circling the sign in front on every single one I'm doing. Okay, so now it's a minus x. Okay, and then finally we have our constant term. Okay, so this is now a positive 4. And so I'm just going to write it down plus 4. So now our polynomial is in standard form, and we have to write out our coefficients. Okay, our coefficients in this case, I'm going to write coefficients are, it looks like we have the 2 from the 2x cubed. Okay, we then have the 0 from 0x squared. We then have the negative 1. Okay, important that we have negative 1 here. Negative 1x. So that's our next coefficient is negative 1. And then finally our last one here is just our constant term, which is positive 4. So we're just going to write a 4. Okay, so again, we have now written our polynomial in standard form, and we have identified the coefficients.